Hello there, everyone, and welcome to this edition of the podcast. So today we are going to, hopefully, if you're not watching this, I think you should, because Ralph has got an amazing T-shirt on. Please describe it for the viewers or listeners, even.
Actually, no, it says something on it, but I can't actually read it now because it's this mirror image. I think it says savage, and I think it's also laughing at you.
Yes.
There is, it's basically, guys, if you see this, this is a T-shirt that I bought last year in Whistler when I was downhill biking.
Nice.
And as I'm preparing to be off again for a month in Whistler later this year for downhill biking and insane laughter, I chose to wear this ridiculous garment on the show.
Downhill bikers are absolute nutters. No, are you going to wear all that armor and all that sort of stuff as well?
Oh yeah, of course, yeah.
God, because when I used to do a lot of cycling, we were at there was a place called Peasmarsh, which is not that far from where I live. And loads of bikers, as in cyclists, not motorbikers, they go somewhere else, but sort of congregate in this place. And the downhill bikers they are nuts. I can't, yeah. I would kill myself, I think, if I did that. And all the body armor and oh god. But anyway.
Yeah, but if I go into the Whistler bike park, then the average age of people goes up by 80%. Yes. It's a very young demographic. When I'm skiing, this is not the case. Yeah. I mean, skiing is much more mainstream now, but downhill biking is still very much for a younger demographic. And
I would say it's for a mentally unstable demographic. I don't think it's an age thing. It's a stability thing.
I think it's a mental age thing. Yeah. They're all 12 years old, and actually that isn't affected the average by me. When I go into the bike park, the mental age doesn't actually go up, but the biological age does. And most gazers who are really radical in the bike park are probably around between 17 or 16 and 18 and perhaps late 20s or so. Yeah. And these guys don't wear a lot of body armor. So you can always see the young people, they don't wear body armor, and the old geezers like me, they come in with these sort of looking like a medieval knight or something.
I don't know. I think you're mental, but anyway,
it's pretty cool. Good, anyway, good. Right.
Right. So today we're going to talk about two things. One is Trump winning the trade war with China, and the other thing is something I mentioned on an earlier podcast this week, which is about my idea that Spotify could potentially step in to try to solve the problem of creators getting paid for what they create when it goes onto things like ChatGPT. So anyway, Trump is he winning the trade with China? Obviously, we've seen that there's he's announced this amazing deal, and that the 145% is coming down and all that kind of stuff. I mean, it's basically 115 percentage points essentially that it's coming down on either side. Still leaves the actual residual tariffs are still high. It's just they're not as high as 145%. So they're still high, but but not as high in comparison. So the thing is, then both sides can say. So China can say, "Hey, look, they put this 145% tax on us, but now because of my strength of negotiation, it's gone right down." And then Trump on his side can say, "Haha, our plan worked. We slapped 145% on them. They didn't like it. So we said, okay, because we're nice, we're going to, reduce it because we're so powerful." So basically both sides can boast that they've done something when in actual fact, really, there's the tariffs are high. And it is going to badly affect trade. So, but then again, if we're talking in kind of Trumpian terms, there are, there's got to be a winner and a loser. And so what do you reckon, Ralph?
Well, I know that I'm not the winner because I still get paid nothing for my services here on the Peter Watson show. But anyway, that's a constant grumble, which I'm going to defer to a later discussion.
Yes.
But now, I don't know. I mean, this has got a lot of aspects which are almost like it's almost like a microcosm for perhaps what is happening here in a macro Trumpian economic scenario, perhaps. But let me just remind everybody how this ratcheted up. So basically, on February the 1st, the US had 10% tariffs on all Chinese goods. And then March the 3rd, it ratcheted up to 20%, and then it was 54%. I'm reading this off. I couldn't remember all of this. Then it was 104%, and then it peaked at 145%. That was on the 9th of April, if I remember this right. That's an insane amount of tariff. We might as well say we make all trade with China illegal. It stops trade, that sort of tariff. Now, during the same sort of time frame, reciprocally, China had 10% tariff on US natural gas, coal and farm machinery, I believe it was, and they had 10% also specifically on some other sector, which I believe was food and agricultural products in general of the US, and they ratcheted that up then to 34% in general on all US imports, and then that went up to 84%, and then it peaked at 125%. That was at the same time as it peaked on the US side. So that is how this ratcheted up. So at that point, basically, we said China and the US have made trade illegal between them. There was no more trading going on. Sorry, I'm amusing myself here. It's not really funny in itself, but it is a little bit of a paradoxical situation, of course. And then we get to 12th of May, which is a week ago, 4 days ago, and the US slashed everything from 145% to 30%, and China followed suit and slashed 125% to 10%. So the net effect of all of this stuff is that the US still has higher tariffs on Chinese goods than they had initially when the ratcheting up the step function started, which was 10%, now it's 30%. And China now has 10% tariffs on all American goods, whereas before this started, it was only on selected segments of the US industry, such as oil and gas and food and agriculture, etc. So the net effect is that both sides still lose from this, but it is astonishing to see how much I can't speak like this on the show, but how much measuring of body parts was going on here.
How does one couch such a phrase?
Let's not linger. Let's move on.
Aubergine measuring. Aubergine measuring. That's what we can say.
Exactly. My aubergine is bigger than yours.
Yes, there we go.
No, sir. Mine is.
Yes.
And they whack the aubergines into each other's. Okay, moving on now. This is now getting too graphic. Anyway. Joking aside, your provocative way of selling this segment of the discussion is Trump winning. No, he's not winning, but that's because nobody's ever winning in a trade war. We know this is an adage in economics, and it is played out in this particular segment of the trade war by the statement or the observation which we have just highlighted, that we are ending up with a situation where tariffs are higher than they were previously at the start of this mechanism for both sides. So nobody is indeed winning. But there is another aspect here, and that is the aspect of metaphorical aubergine measuring here. So who basically caved in earlier, because this is, of course, a show of force as well going on here. And the show of force is initiated here by the United States, by Donald Trump. And from that point of view, I think if anything can be said, looking at the dynamics of these, in inverted commas, negotiations, it is Trump who caved in, not the Chinese. In fact, if you listen to the rhetoric coming out of the Chinese administration, they were extremely firm in stating that they will fight until the end. I think they said in sort of, well, it was said in Chinese, but in the US translation. And the reason I think that Trump caved in lies in the fact that obviously the US is dependent on China, as of course China is dependent to a large extent on the US. The US is dependent on China because it is the largest consumer goods producer in the world and the second largest economy in the world after the United States. And we've discussed this, I think, on the show before, but it takes about 30 days or so for a ship to travel from China to Los Angeles, which is the quickest route to America from China. And the companies there have planned their inventories in accordance to this time length. So after around 30, 40 days, the inventories run down. And in this particular scenario, where trade was made effectively illegal, so to speak, it was the case that the supermarkets were already emptying. The supermarkets in Los Angeles and on the West Coast were already running very low on stock because the ships from China arrived empty as a consequence of the tariffs. And when that happens, of course, even Trump is going to not perhaps lose his base, but his support in the population is going to melt away. And that was visible in the polls, in the opinion polls, in the approval ratings. They weren't disastrous. There were still about 40% of Americans who broadly agreed with Trump, but that came down from about 50%. So he was clearly losing in the approval ratings. And if you look at the world, as I believe Trump may look at the world, it's approval ratings which he cares for. And that, I think, is the reason why he was proving conciliatory in the end, more than an actual understanding that the trade, the level of these tariffs would be detrimental to the US economy and to the US citizenship. So that's, I think, what we can learn from this. We can learn something economical from this, but more than that, I think we can learn something about the psychology of Donald Trump and what he cares for and what he looks at. And if I was China, of course, I would know how to play him, because this is how you stand up to this, and it will have an effect. The end effect economically is that both countries are worse off than they were before.
Fair enough. I mean, I think we'll leave it there, because I mean that basically is it, isn't it? Really, like, you know, trade wars, no one wins. And then, I mean, I think in this case, each side is professing that they are winning, but ultimately, it's not.
No, they're not. Yeah. I mean, we could leave it there, but I want to make one more comment, and this is what may lie behind it. We kind of alluded to it in a previous podcast here on the weekly show. It is not, I mean, I don't know, this is sort of my own interpretation, but I'm basing it on various essays which have been issued and published by the Trump administration. I'm guessing, or I'm agreeing with other commentators who have said this, that the end game, if there is one, is to reduce the cost of interest of the national debt, because the national debt of the US is very high indeed. It's about 130% of GDP, and the annual cost of servicing this debt is now at a level where it is a meaningful percentage of GDP. I think about 5% or so. And there's one economist, I think in the 19th century, his name is Adam Ferguson, has highlighted something which has been gone down in economic law as Ferguson's law, and that is when the cost of debt servicing begins to be higher than the defense spending of an economy. Mm-hmm. So in this case, it's 5% of GDP is used to service the national debt. Around 5% of GDP is used as an investment in defense every year by the US. So the numbers are now equal. And when the one surpasses the other, Adam Ferguson said 200 years ago, that is when empires start to fall. And recently, another modern contemporary historian, confusingly by the same name, Neil Ferguson, has dug that out and written a paper highlighting Ferguson's law as an important law, which I think the economists in America are also aware of. So I think it is not implausible to suggest that people in the US, those who are aware of this, those around Trump who are his economic advisors, are beginning to wonder whether America is going to sort of fail or fall even as this particular Ferguson law is starting to kick in, as the national debt servicing is starting or threatening to surpass the investments in defense that is being made every year. So therefore, you could think that the master plan would then surely have to be to lower the cost of that debt service. And clearly that is something which I believe is clearly at the heart of what they're trying to do here. But they're doing it for the wrong reasons, or that's not the right way of saying it. The way they wish to do it is that's the wrong means to achieve it. Because clearly what they seem to be achieving is to crash the economy, force the Fed to lower interest rates in order to accelerate growth in the economy, in the failing economy, and then they can say, well, interest rates are now low, and therefore the cost of servicing our national debt is lower, and happy days. But of course, that's incorrect. That would only be the case if interest rates were to come down because, well, for positive reasons. But we are going to get into a situation because of the tariffs where we have stagflation, a stagnating economy, which still has inflating prices for goods because of the tariffs. So they're choosing, to my mind, an insane way of achieving something which, because they're choosing this particular way of doing it, is not going to rescue them if indeed Ferguson's law, as formulated by Adam Ferguson 200 years ago, is what they are afraid of. So this is maybe a little bit of a new aspect which is beginning to be talked about in commentary, but it may well be that it is this ancient Ferguson's law, which is this balance of the relative investment in defense and the cost of servicing the national debt, which is at the forefront of people's minds in the Trump administration. That is behind all this chaos which we're seeing at the moment.
Okay, nice. Always like the use of the word chaos. Always good.
Chaos.
Well, as long as it doesn't apply to me or my immediate surroundings, then yes. Anyway, okay, right. Let's move on. So earlier on this week, I was doing a podcast with Duncan, and I had an idea actually on the podcast. Hadn't actually thought of it before the podcast. It was while I was speaking to him. And I find this happens. I mean, this is one of the reasons why I really enjoy doing podcasts in this format, because, there are times when, and this used to happen to me when I was a broker, either when I was on the phone with a client or with analysts or, talking to analysts, then suddenly ideas would just pop up and, I'd then kind of follow them. And this is what happened the other day. So basically, the story is that there's a lot of stuff going on about AI at the moment, and there's been some startups who are advertising companies and the likes of Google, for instance, are losing out on ad revenues. You've got and they are concerned that search is changing because people are now, rather than their default position of Googling something, they will chat GPT something, and then the whole the Bing and the Copilot and all that stuff, right? So it's all the same kind of idea, right? So that instead of going to a traditional search engine, you don't do that anymore. And there are these. So the idea is, especially in an environment where there's economic uncertainty, one of the first things that goes is ad spend. And when you're thinking about ad spend, you're thinking about being most efficient with where you put, where you spend your advertising dollars. So there have been companies that have been cropping up who are advising companies on how to best position their content and what they do and the way they express themselves, online. How can they optimize their chances of appearing in chat GPT searches or, in these chatbot searches? And that then got me to thinking about how do you, and this is something that's been going on for a while now. How do content creators monetize their content, especially now that you've got chat GPT, etc., and then they're training on whatever content is out there. And this then, sorry, I know this is a bit of a train of thought, but anyway, this then got me to thinking, well, how, we've seen, it feels like something I've seen before, and this is obviously aging me, but I have got grey hair and stuff, so, it should be expected. Is back in the day, sort of late 90s, early 2000s, when Napster came along and started off stream. Well, it probably wasn't the first, but it was the first the one to really do it was Napster, and people were going mad about it because they could listen to all this music for free and they didn't have to pay anyone. And all the record companies were going mad because they were thinking, well, we have no control. We have so far had control over distribution and all this kind of thing, so we know what's going on. But then now we've got people are streaming all this content and we can't monetize it. And then once that was a big shock for all of the big music companies. And then after that, we then saw the rise of the streamers like, iTunes and Spotify. Let's just take Spotify, for instance, right? Now, it went from being an absolute disaster, the world is going to end, content, musicians, it's all gone, no one's going to be able to make any money anymore, to nowadays where actually, streaming is a huge source of income for these people. And I guess you get more the more famous you are. Now, I don't know all the detailed ins and outs of it, but as far as I understand, with Spotify and Apple, etc., what they do is they have a meeting. I think it's every year, at least once a year. I think it is, or it may be, but it's a regular interval. And what they do is they meet up with BMG, Sony Music Entertainment. They meet at Universal. They meet with all the big music companies, and they agree the royalty fees. So every time you click on whatever it is, whatever song you might like, they get some, royalties are paid. Now, I think so I suppose that with that, so Spotify, they get the money from or everyone signing up, as a paid subscriber, but they also get money from advertising, and that advertising, is for people who want the free version. Now, I think that that perhaps Spotify could maybe diversify its revenue stream by approaching media companies and like News Corp or whatever it may be, WPP and all the rest of them, and go to them and say, look, we can help you monetize your content, because look at what we've done with music. So we can use our expertise to represent you, and we can negotiate with OpenAI, with Meta, with Microsoft, whoever it is, right? We can do it on your behalf because we've done it before and it works. And I've no idea whether anyone's ever suggested that. It literally came to me during a podcast, and I thought, wouldn't it be interesting if that could happen? And then that way you get the creator gets paid, you get they don't have to have their individual negotiations with OpenAI, etc. And it levels the playing field in the sense that if you've got, say, loads of News Corp signing up, and if you've got them all signed up, you then have negotiating power. And I think that that's a good thing, because I think at the moment it feels like each outlet has to have its own kind of agreement with, say, OpenAI. But if you actually got them together with, let's say, Spotify, they would be able to get a much better deal. But anyway, I've rambled on. I know that I've talked about how I came to this idea, but I mean, what do you have any thoughts? Well, I'm hoping you do, because otherwise this podcast is going to end right now. But do you have any thoughts on this, Ralph?
No.
There we go. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much for listening. Absolutely brilliant. And we will be here next week.
Yeah. Well, thanks very much.
Yeah, excellent. I'm full of good, insightful commentary.
You're always full of something, that's for sure.
Well, basically, it's the thing. Let's bring Ralphie in on the show and ask what he thinks, and we are going to develop something. But unfortunately, Ralphie knows nothing at all about this, and this, however, has never deterred me from talking about something for a very long time.
I'm glad to hear it.
So now I shall talk about this for the next hour. So
sit down, relax, pin your ears back.
Everybody lean back, get the popcorn out.
Let it all roll in. Let it all roll in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right, so I'm interested in exploring the analogy first, because it's the Napster Spotify analogy, and Spotify is the service to use here because it was first. I think it was actually a fight between Napster and Spotify, or at least it was a fight between Napster and the music industry, and then Spotify tried to take the idea which Napster basically had, which is to open up access to music, but make it commercially viable and make it legal. I think that is the great revolutionary insight which Spotify had. Spotify spotted. Sorry.
I see what you did there.
Yeah. Gosh, I'm so funny. A particular. They spotted the market because the market was people had the technological capability now to move away from siloed carriers of music like CDs, etc., and wanted open access to basically all music. That is what Napster tried to provide.
Yeah.
The problem with Napster was it basically stole the music and it cared nothing about IP, intellectual property. Spotify spotted the trend and made it commercially viable and legal. That meant that Spotify found a way to keep the music behind the paywall, but made it available, open access, to those who would pay for that open access. These days, either through accepting advertisements, in which case the consumer wouldn't pay, but the advertisers would, or by using the premium service, which I'm, for example, using by paying a tenner a month or something. Now, if that's the analogy which we're exploring here, then the AI engines, the LLMs of this world, would be analogous to Napster. They are the ones who, by trundling through the content that is freely available on the internet, would basically take content without paying the copyright holder for the use of that content. And that is not a new observation. That has been explored before in sort of, I don't know whether there were any court cases, but there's certainly the question out there of how to deal with copyright infringement if indeed an LLM accessing content freely available on the internet constitutes copyright infringement. This is all, I think, up in the air currently. But for the moment, let us assume that the LLMs are the equivalent of Napster. Then content providers would indeed scratch their heads and ask themselves, well, like Copilot of something has just taken a paragraph which very much reminds me of something I've written in my book and produced it here as the response to my prompt without paying me a dime for it. And so how could that then be solved? And this is also where I really am struggling with this, because for there to be a possible royalty payment from the LLM to the content provider, that content provider would have to be identified as the author, and the content that they are contributing would have to be identifiable as content. But we know how LLMs work. They just basically go through the internet or through the learning material, and it's basically like a big soup. They're just predicting the probability of the next word to occur. And the more stringently you define the parameters of the learning material, meaning that you create smaller subsets of the internet, more specialized subsets. We talked about Hiscox using the insurance company using an LLM to train the underwriters, etc. These are all specialized subsets of the big the word soup which is out there on the internet. So the more that gets specified, the more you might say content becomes identifiable. But so that, I think, would be my first point. The content would need to be identifiable for a valid claim from somebody to be paid for that contribution to exist. And then second, then, if such cohesive blobs of content can be identified, then we get to your idea. How can that then be perhaps monetized through a platform that negotiates the payment for copyright with the content providers? And the content providers in this case are the ones which you mentioned, News Corp, or maybe it's newspapers, the Financial Times, or whoever owns the Financial Times. And of course publishing houses, Big Penguin, etc., etc. But that leads me to a second point. You know, there's a lot of stuff which is out there on the internet which is freely available. But not all books, for example, novels or non-fiction books, scientific studies, etc., are freely available. Most of that stuff is behind the paywall.
Yeah.
And just to give you one example, the book which I self-published, that's behind the paywall. You cannot find that on the internet. I've been very obsessed about keeping that copyright to myself, so that there is no free PDF which is basically available on the internet. And so if you want to use that or access that content, you either would have to buy the book, or I would have to make it freely available on the internet to be discoverable by an LLM. And I'm, of course, only one example. There are lots of other people who write books and keep them behind the paywall. So that, I think, is the second step. We need to get to the situation where either people do that, or where the Spotify analog is the one who negotiates access to all this material with the owners of the copyright. These are the authors, but which the administrators of the copyright, which is the publishing houses, etc. And if it does, what could then be the format? Now, I think that is then shaping up into an interesting business proposition, because that might be something like Kindle Unlimited, which is a service that exists for Kindle books, which is the Spotify of books. I mean, you pay a monthly subscription, and that gives you access to whatever it is, 10,000 or millions of books. I don't do that. I can't read that many books. I'm very much in awe of people who actually subscribe to that, because it sort of means that they would have to be able to read 10 books a month or so to make that commercially viable. But it does exist, and that would be a possible way of doing it. Another way, I was just thinking about this, would be to would be a report writing LLM engine, a report writing AI, where you can basically in the prompt you basically say, okay, how can I sort my life out, or how do I find the best job for me? Please access written reports which are available to you, or books on this subject. Now, that already exists. There is a report writing AI, but of course it is only as good as the material which is available to it. And so if that could be done, I think that would be interesting. Maybe that's where I'm getting towards a commercially viable proposition. If there was an agent such as the Spotify analog, could be Amazon, of course, as well, who would sit behind that paywall and negotiate with all the owners, like the publishing houses and the owners of newspapers, to pay royalties to the identifiable copyright owners for the use of their content in the LLM. Then the copyright problem, which is currently being discussed as a potential problem in the running of LLMs, would be solved potentially, and the learning material which is available to LLMs would be vastly enhanced, and commensurately, one would think, so would be the quality of the search engines, which are being enhanced currently by AI propositions, as we discussed last week on the show. So maybe that's a blueprint or a thought process which might work.
Indeed.
All of this, of course, invented on the spot. I knew nothing about this before I came on the show.
I have got it. I have solved it. Right. It's going to be called Spotify, SPOTIFAI, right? See what I did there? Okay. So that's going to be called Spotify. Then what they're going to do, they're going to get everyone to sign up to them. All content creators, when they create a digital version of whatever it is they do, there'll be a little box, and they'll click the box, and that will mean that I will make this available for Spotify, right? Spotify. Right? Okay. Then you have I'm just going to say OpenAI, right? So ChatGPT, and then you have the free version, which will have adverts, and those adverts will be very good because they will be able to know what you have been looking at, on there, and the sort of, I think it's even better than knowing what you're looking up on Google, for instance, because quite often I find, when I've used AI, you're finding things out. Then it says, what do you think of this response? And you're thinking, well, actually, I don't think it was very good, or I think you should have said this. You're constantly personalizing it. And that could be very useful for adverts. So I think, I'm pretty sure they've said they won't do it, but I think they should. So I said the free version, you will have adverts. Those adverts will be very, very personalized and effective, I think. And then you have your paid for version, where you don't have the advert. So basically, like pretty much any platform that's available now. That way, you get Spotify will people will sign up. These content creators will sign up to them, and Spotify will go to Spotify will represent them, and every year we'll talk about licensing. And so let's say, for instance, you are a user and you say, right, I want to sort my life out. How do I do it? You hit return. Boom. Answers come up. Your book by your pen name, Mark Hebwood, comes up. And you see, a number of reference. You see, like a block of text initially, like here is like some executive summary version, and it quotes you in there. You, as the user, click on your. They think, oh, I've heard of this Mark Hebwood guy, right? They click on it. That gets you a 50p or something. Then they read and go, actually, that's really good. I quite like. So what I'd like to read that chapter. Click again. You get another load of money, right? And then they think, do you know what? He's such a good guy, and he knows what he's talking about. I'll buy the book, right? And then boom, you get it again. So that way, I kind of wonder that you'll get multiple bites at the cherry here, and it may be like if you appear in the first bit, maybe you get 2p. If you're clicked again, you get 10p. If you get clicked again, you get 50p. I'm just throwing figures out, but
sure. It's just staggered fee structure.
But I
absolutely.
think that could be pretty interesting, and if you combine that sort of thing with in a way, it would be like almost like a democratic version of what we've got now. Whereas now, if companies will pay and do things to move up the rankings, whereas actually, maybe search engines will use it more fair. Will recommend things more fairly, perhaps. I don't know, depending on how often people access them and things. I
don't know. This goes to my sort of report writing AI idea, but which is not really my idea. I think that exists already. But it would be you get like a text, like 10-page report or something, and in that report you get executive summary and you get all sorts of things, various chapters, and that would highlight the sources from which it takes the information, and it would basically summarize intelligently the information from all these various sources. So that's the report you're getting, and then you can click on the sources and maybe get an executive summary then, and then you have your staggered fee income generation, which you just mentioned. Maybe that's a way to do it. You see, because where the analogy with Spotify fails is that the content is different. Music I don't really care so much whether I listen to the entire album Back in Black from AC/DC. I don't have to. I just listen to one song from AC/DC's Back in Black album, and then I listen to another song from a different album, and then I listen to another song from a different band, from a completely different album. So the idea of the album, which is sort of like the 70s idea of a cohesive element, that has completely disappeared already on Spotify. And that, however, is inherent to a book. You can't just simply read one sentence from the first chapter and a sentence from the 7th chapter or whatever.
No, but you can read.
It doesn't work.
Yeah,
so
but
you need to have
you can
a
read
cohesive.
Chapters, can't you?
Yes, chapters. Yes, but that's my point. You need to read either a cohesive paragraph or a cohesive chapter, and so that is why this report writing engine perhaps will give you access to one chapter. But you can read a chapter. I think you can even read a paragraph from a chapter, but there has to be some cohesiveness in that. But what is interesting, of course, to the content provider is that I could, for example, I'm selling my book, or as an ebook costs like £5 or something. I can't even remember. It's something like that. But then, of course, maybe you don't want to read through the entire blurb, which I've come up with. You're only interested in one chapter, and then maybe it costs you 10p. Or you only want to read a paragraph in a few chapters, and that costs you 5p or so. And that is how you build it up as a content user. And so, that might be interesting. Let's see where the development goes on that.
You know that the Apple version of this will be called, right? AI tunes.
iTunes, yes. Yeah, it would be.
Anyway,
you're very good.
So anyway, I mean, who knows? Who knows, right? I mean, I just think that if this could be, I feel this could be the way forward, because content creators get paid for what they do. They get paid for how often their stuff is accessed. The OpenAI can make money, although it's now not for profit, but it's got to pay everyone somehow. So they can charge subscription like every other like Netflix or whatever it is. Just use exactly the same model, and that means that the content that they use will be good. It's quality content. And more people will want to use it as a result. It's like, isn't it? Like if you had Spotify and all it had was, I don't know, local folk music groups or something. I mean, I've got nothing against local folk music groups, but I'm thinking it's not quite the same as having the whole back catalogue of AC/DC or Taylor Swift or whatever.
Exactly.
Right. So that's what you want. So why not? I mean, I think that means quality content, more useful, people use it, so they will think, well, actually a subscription, I can do that. Or if I can't afford it, then give me the adverts, it's fine. Everywhere is like that now. So, so I don't know. I mean, I feel that that's what it needs to do. And that in that way, everyone in theory benefits. I'm sure, obviously, I bet you there'll be ways of gaming the system and all that, because there always are, but in theory I would have thought that gives everyone a fair shot at making money out of it, so and benefiting from it, of course. So as a user, you get your homework done or whatever, you get whatever it is you want out of it, but you use good content, like the top quality content from Mark Hedwood, for example. Just as for instance. So
who's written an excellent book, the royalties of which sustain him, because sure as hell he's not going to make any money on this show.
Oh God! And we come full circle.
It's funny how we always do. Yes. There's a reason for that. Yes. Do you know the reason?
Yes. Well,
because I'm making no money.
Yeah. Good.
All right.
Good.
Maybe guys, you could basically do a petition.
Yes.
Pay Ralphie some money.
Well, I get nothing from this either. You see,
so violence! Come on, come on.
Well, I don't. I get nothing from it.
You are the CEO and founder of a business.
Oh yes.
You're a fat cat.
Well, I mean, half of that is true, and I'm not a cat. So yes.
Anyway, good stuff.
Anyway, right. Well, thank you very much indeed. Thank you everyone for listening or watching. And thank you, Ralph, as always, for being wonderful and knowledgeable. Etc. So thank you very much indeed.
Pleasure, guys.
Have a great
Thanks for having me.
All right. Bye.